to go ahead and get to our message. And to do so, we're going to start by reading a passage out of the book of Acts. We're in a series called Why Church, where we're asking the question like, why are we doing this church thing? Why does church matter? And what we're thinking about it in the terms of cities. We believe that God has called particular churches to particular places, and the calling of every church is connected to that specific place. And so we're looking at a few different cities where there was a church in the New Testament, and we're seeing what happened there. And so we're going to see what happened in the city of Philippi. All right, so I'll give you the background in a few moments, but go ahead, listen. This actually is a heck of a story, so it's going to take me a few moments to read through it. All right, so from Troas, this is a story of Paul and Silas and Luke, the one who wrote the Gospel of Luke, who also wrote the book of Acts. From Troas, we put out to sea and sailed straight for Samothrace, and the next day we went to Neapolis. From there, we traveled to Philippi, a Roman colony and the leading city of that district of Macedonia, and we stayed there several days. On the Sabbath, we went outside the city gate to the river, where we expected to find a place of prayer. We sat down and began to speak to the women there who had gathered. One of those listening was a woman from the city of Thyatira named Lydia, a dealer in purple cloth. She was a worshiper of God. The Lord opened her heart to respond to Paul's message. When she and the members of her household were baptized, she invited us to her home. "If you consider me a believer in the Lord," she said, "come and stay at my house." And she persuaded us. Once when we were going to the place of prayer, we were met by a female slave who had a spirit by which she predicted the future. She earned a great deal of money for her owners by fortune-telling. She followed Paul and the rest of us, shouting, "These men are servants of the Most High God who are telling you the way to be saved." She kept this up for many days. Finally, Paul became so annoyed that he turned around and said to the spirit, "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to come out of her." At that moment, the spirit left her. When her owners realized that their hope of making money was gone, they seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace to face the authorities. They brought them before the magistrates and said, "These men are Jews and are throwing our city into an uproar by advocating customs unlawful for us Romans to accept or practice." The crowd joined in the attack against Paul and Silas, and the magistrates ordered them to be stripped and beaten with rods. After they'd been severely flogged, they were thrown into prison, and the jailer was commanded to guard them carefully. When he received these orders, he put them in the inner cell and fastened their feet in the stocks. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners were listening to them. Suddenly, there was such a violent earthquake that the foundations of the prison were shaken. At once, all the prison doors flew open, and everyone's chains came loose. The jailer woke up, and when he saw the prison doors open, he drew his sword and was about to kill himself because he thought the prisoners had escaped. But Paul shouted, Don't harm yourself. We are all here." The jailer called for lights, rushed in, and fell trembling before Paul and Silas. He then brought them out and asked, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" They replied, "Believe in the Lord Jesus, and you will be saved, you and your household." Then they spoke the word of the Lord to him and to all the others in his house. At that hour of the night, the jailer took them and washed their wounds. Then immediately he and all his household were baptized. The jailer brought them into his house and set a meal before them. He was filled with joy because he had come to believe in God, he and his whole household. All right, did you get all that? There was a lot going on there. There was a lot of things going on there. But my hope for you is that as we look at this, you'll recognize how the gospel meets each person in their own unique way and activates in each of those people something that the community needs in its own unique way. And just a heads up, if you've ever thought church is for like somebody else but not you, or like church is for like people like these kind of people, but I'm not one of those kinds of people, I think this message might be really helpful for you. Let's start talking about Paul and Silas. And we know Luke was there. He's the one who wrote the book of Acts. He's a historian, and because he was there, you get a lot of extra really good details, okay? So Paul and you have Silas, and what I didn't read, because there's just an awful lot to read, is that before they went to Philippi, they were trying to go to Asia, like modern-day Turkey. They were missionaries. They're bringing the message of the gospel around the Roman world, and they just wanted to go to Turkey, and what we know now of Turkey, and they couldn't. And all they could explain is that somehow the Spirit of Jesus kept them from doing it. I have no idea what that means. But they tried once, and they tried twice, and next thing you know, Paul has a dream. And in this dream, there's a man from Macedonia, which is like the region of Philippi, right? So think Philadelphia is in Pennsylvania, right? Philippi is in Macedonia, right? So kind of region, maybe not as big as Pennsylvania, but you get the idea, right? So he has this dream that this man of Macedonia is calling him, hey, come talk to us. And so Paul's like, okay, I know Jesus didn't want me to go to Asia. He wants me to go to... So, all right, there's this man in Macedonia, and they go to Philippi, but there's like no Jews there. You need at least 10 Jewish men to form a synagogue. They don't have a synagogue there. And so what would typically happen is there'd be like a prayer meeting, right? And so Paul and Silas, they're going to the prayer meeting looking for this man from Macedonia, and they get to the prayer meeting, and what do they find? Women. And they're like, all right, we'll start here. And they begin speaking to these women. And I want you to meet a few different people along the way of the stories. There's Paul, Silas, and Luke. But now let's meet Lydia. Okay? Paul is talking there to these folks who are at a place of prayer. Lydia is not Jewish. She has a technical term. She's a worshiper of God, which means that she's a Gentile who's interested in the God of Israel and is seeking the God of Israel. And what you're going to see is that that Lydia's a unique person, and God's going to speak to her in a unique way. A little bit more about her. She is probably single, or she's got like a husband who's like not into that religious thing, quite detached. She is a professional. She's a merchant. She's probably very wealthy. It says she's a dealer in purple cloth. Purple dye in those days was like a rare commodity. And so she was a textile. She was in the fashion industry, right? And she was wealthy. She functioned as the head of her household. And it said that as Paul was speaking the message, it says the Lord opened her heart to respond to the message of Paul. Paul likely would have gone to them and began explaining the Jewish scriptures and how the blessing that it was given to Abraham was fulfilled through Jesus, that Jesus became a curse for us on the cross so that the blessing that came to Abraham would not just go to the people of Israel, but would go to all Gentiles, and that through Abraham and through Jesus, the blessing that was given to Abraham and Israel was given to all people. Paul would explain how the tabernacle and the temple was representative of the presence of God. But now that there's no need for a temple, because now the people of God are the very temple and the presence of God. And the Holy Spirit doesn't live in one specific place. Now the Holy Spirit lives among the people of God. And that there's no need for sacrifices anymore because Jesus was the final sacrifice. And now that the resurrected Jesus is alive, there's a new day and there's new life for everyone. And when Lydia heard that, she's like, I'm in. That's what I'm interested in. That's why I've been coming here all this time. And Paul's like, this is great. And for Lydia, though, and maybe it's because she was a professional, she's a business person, whatever, she needed to hear a rational message. And that's going to be different than what you're going to see in the rest of the story. What you're going to see is that the gospel came to her through a rational explanation. And what you see, though, Okay, if you want to start a church, Paul's looking for a man in Macedonia to start a church. He's looking for at least like 10 Jews. He's not finding anyone. If you're going to start a church, you're probably not looking for a Gentile. You're probably not looking for a Gentile woman. You're probably not looking, you don't necessarily think it's going to be a business person. You probably don't think it's going to be a single person. And you're probably not thinking it's going to be a female. Well, that ancient culture, right? But all preconceived notions set aside, that is exactly where the church started, in that city. And it confronts our typical preconceived notions. You could tell that Paul was kind of resistant to it. Why? Because when he came to, after she had responded to the message, she says, hey, you need a place to stay. Like, she's a businessman. She understands, like, this guy's got a message. He's got to do something. You need a place to stay. He said, come to stay at my house. And he's like, I don't know. And you can tell she says, if you consider me a believer in the Lord, like, am I legit? Am I not legit enough? And finally says, she persuaded them. She's a business person. Paul needed her. She knew everybody in town. She was going to get doors open for him. She knew how to get stuff done, and she had a place for him to stay. And she's challenging him, can you get over your own preconceived notions and allow me to help you? And Paul finally comes together. A lot of folks, when they think of the faith, they think of there's like a certain kind of people that belong in the church, right? Or they think that the church is for a certain ethnicity. A lot of times business people think they have nothing to offer the church. When in reality, the church needs people who know how to get stuff done. The church needs business people. The church really needs business people. The church needs leaders. The church needs female leaders. The church needs single leaders. One of the things that has happened to the church, and it's just a cultural thing, and just think sort of the white church in America over the last 50, 60 years, is after World War II, all of a sudden there's this phenomenon of single income homes, right? And because they're single income homes, oftentimes it's the females that are at home, and it was a very, very good thing. A lot of these very capable females end up really building the church in a significant way, but because they're the ones building the church, oftentimes dudes are like, well, maybe church isn't for me. Why? Because most of what has gotten done was done by these stay-at-home moms, right? And so what ends up happening is that single people think, well, I guess church is just for married people. Dudes start thinking, well, I guess church is just for like kind of women and they want to like talk to each other or what, right? And we start having these preconceived notions as to who church is for. That's certainly not true of this church. But it's not true of what the church has been historically. The fact of the matter is single people have clarity on really, really important issues that married people end up just kind of getting foggy with. Single people have the ability to rally together people that married people sometimes get hunkered down with. Married people oftentimes get hunkered down with their kids, or they build the church around their kids. The best churches you'll find have strong single leaders, have strong male leadership, strong female leadership. And because of the diversity of that kind of leadership, they continue to make good choices. They continue to include as many people as possible. The best churches have really strong business people who know how to make really good, effective decisions and manage and get things done. Let me ask you this. When you think of church, do you ever think it's for a certain kind of person? The certain kind of age of a person? What if the gospel is activating you to make the church better, to profoundly affect the church? It's not just Lydia. Watch what happens with this slave girl. Now, if you want, this is our freaky story of the morning. All right. So what ends up happening is that they don't have a synagogue to work with, and so it's not like there's a lecture hall for Paul. And so when it's time for ministry, Paul and Silas they walk across town and they go to the place of prayer. But this thing starts happening, and it's this pattern. It's this slave girl who has some sort of demon possession or whatever. And every time Paul and Silas walks by, she just says the quiet thing out loud, at least the quiet thing in her own heart. She makes it really weird by starts yelling at everybody, "Hey, everybody, these are servants of the Most High God. You should probably listen to them because we're all going to die, and they're going to show you how you can be saved." And Paul's like, "Shut up. I'm trying to do something here." And every single day, they walk through town, and here comes a slave girl screaming that thing out. And we could spend an entire message on this, right? But Paul's compassion doesn't pop. It's not like Paul's like, "Oh, I feel really bad for you. Let me help you." I mean, he gets annoyed at the situation and delivers her from the demon based upon her annoyance. And I'm going to explain why. Now, if Paul would have addressed this woman with a rational explanation like he brought to Lydia, she might have enjoyed the sermon, but it wouldn't have changed her life. This is a woman who was spiritually oppressed and who was socially oppressed. She was a slave, and there's something demonic going on inside of her that needs spiritual power. But there was also something deeply corrupt socially that was going on. Why? Because the businessmen of that community were using her to make money. Okay? And so Paul had a hesitation to deal with her. Why? Because he knew that dealing with this kind of oppression was going to be costly. And I think and before we go to that, I think it's just helpful to recognize that we assume that whatever God did in our lives to help us awaken to Him, we assume that's what God would do in other people's lives, right? For a lot of people, their storyline is they grew up in the faith and they kind of knew who God was, and then they might have drifted away, and all of a sudden there's an awakening, and all of a sudden they're like, "You know what? I need to prioritize. I need to rebuild my relationship with God. I need to get focused." And a lot of times the storyline is just about people's faith. Is all of a sudden there is a dramatic spiritual awakening followed by a little bit of reprioritization and discipline, right? And so you come across someone like this, and you start thinking, well, she just needs to reprioritize her life and get disciplined. And remember, if you come to her and you bring to her message, she might not like it, but she's still oppressed spiritually and socially. And I think about this. I've driven Uber from time to time, and Uber just takes you where you go. And I don't know how many times I've found myself in West Philly with a young teenage male smelling like pot in the back of my seat, in the back seat of my car. I could tell him about Jesus, and that might be powerful. It might even be life-changing, but it's not going to put a responsible male into his home. It's not going to put a responsible male in his life. The gospel means that we need to be activated not just to help people spiritually, not to help people understand the truth, but people need not just spiritual power in their lives, they need social power. And the truth of the matter is, biblical justice, conscientious spirituality, and a growing economy rarely agree with each other as to what should happen, and they rarely get along. I've done recovery ministry for a long time, and my role in the recovery ministry was to meet the person on their first day there. And when your first day going to a recovery scenario is rarely a good day. When you decide that you need to go for recovery, you know that the pain of staying the same has gotten way higher than the pain of change, and you just want it to change. And I've heard 1, 2, 3, probably 500 different recovery stories in my life they always make sense. And you wonder, how did somebody get to this place? Nobody grew up saying, I'd like to be an alcoholic someday. Nobody grows up saying, you know what, I'd like to get married and then wreck that marriage someday. Hurt people, and there's a lot of hurt in this world. And people get to places and they can't get themselves out of it. Just a simple message and a little discipline doesn't change things for people. They need power. The power of recovery is the power of community and being in the light with other people to help you out of a situation like this. This woman needed a spiritual deliverance. Some people ask me, is that just like the Bible's way of talking about mental health? No, mental health is a real physiological phenomenon, and I also believe that there's a real spiritual world of evil that functions as well. Can there be a dual diagnosis sometimes? Yes. But this woman was delivered spiritually, and she needed social justice to free her from this oppression. And this is ministry sometimes. When you follow Jesus, you follow someone who replaced the pain of others with his own pain. And that's exactly what happens to Paul. Because once he frees her, it wrecks the local economy, and they're not going to have that. And so instead of this girl being oppressed, she gets freed, but at the cost of Paul and Silas's freedom. They get thrown into jail, and that's just what happens. When you try to minister to a depressed person, they're going to depress you. If you're going to minister to somebody who struggles with anger, they're going to get angry with you. When you try to minister to a manipulator, they're going to manipulate you. When you care for people, their issues become your problem. But that's how it is with the church. That's how it is when it comes to serving others. That is how the world is changed. We absorb the sufferings of this world to return to it return a blessing to it. And that's at the heart of what Jesus has done for us on the cross. That's the heart of what true sacrificial love looks like. Let me ask you, Paul hesitated at the cost of caring for this woman. Do you have something that you know could be activated by God and move the purposes of God forward, but are afraid of the cost? Remember who you follow. Jesus did not hold back on the cost for any of us. Well, neither did Paul, and there he was in jail. And if you remember the story, when they saw that this woman was freed of her oppression, it was a big problem. They take Paul and Silas and they take them before the magistrates, and then the entire community is like, we lost the freak show girl. What happened? And they get all upset, and so he gets flogged, he gets beaten with rods, and thrown in prison, and given over to a jailer. The jailer doesn't care. He continues on the torture and puts them in the stocks. The stocks at that time is when you get seated down and then your legs get spread eagle and they just lock you in as if like they're worried about these guys getting out. There's a whole bunch of prisoners in this jail, but Paul and Silas, they get the stocks. And that's the jailer. Let's meet the jailer. The jailer at that time, most jailers were former Roman soldiers. Probably a civil servant, blue-collar guy. He kind of hardened to life. He's probably seen a lot of death, might have caused a lot of death in his life. These guys were a nuisance. He could have helped dress their wounds, but he's like, no, you know what, I don't care. And he sticks them in the stocks just to make things just a little bit harder, just to twist that knife a little bit further. But watch his experience. It's actually quite a beautiful thing. Paul and Silas, they're in jail and they're in pain. And then it's midnight. It's the middle of the night and it's real dark. I mean, it's like dark. Like they don't have like the glow of whatever. It's like real dark. And they're with a bunch of criminals. And there they are singing. And it's actually a Hebrew tradition to have your own songs of the night. Songs that you go back to in the middle of the night when fear and loneliness creep up on you or pain. Uh, Sometime around age 40, which was like not long ago for me, I started waking up in the middle of the night. And I don't know if you've had this experience, but there's something about what happens to me when I wake up in the middle of the night. I have crystal clarity on every single one of my problems. And what I don't see oftentimes is the resources. And so the temptation for me in the middle of the night is in my pride is that I'm going to work them. I'm just going to keep thinking about solutions. I'm going to keep thinking about solutions. And yet I rarely see the resources around me. It's all about what I need to do in order to deal with a situation. And it's always a mix of fear and pride and loneliness or whatever it might be. But I learned along the way of the Hebrew tradition of singing your song in the night. Finding that song that you can begin taking your heart through to remind yourself of what is true. At night, it's time to sleep, and sleep was given to us by God because we need rest. Night is the time where we can rest from our problems because our problems aren't ultimately ours. God is in control of all things, and He really is in control of our life. And I learned that by singing that song, I can release myself from having to carry the responsibility for whatever was on my mind. And I can remind myself of the things that are true, not by thinking my way through it, by singing my heart through it. And so I've come up with songs, and in different times in my life, I've had a different song or a different prayer that I pray to remind myself of what is true. And here is the jailer. He's got to stay awake in the middle of the night, and he's listening to Paul and Silas pray prayers and sing their songs and sing their way through their suffering. And mind you, the jailer he's seen everything, right? Because you put people in jail and they're crying about their abuse, they're complaining about this, they're lamenting. It's all big mess of just utter darkness, as darkness, people screaming out as to what they think they deserve or what's wrong with the situation, or their mental, emotional, or physical pain. And here, the jailer is singing or hearing songs. And clearly, Paul and Silas have something he doesn't have. And I guess like happens in the Bible from time to time, the big moment occurs, an earthquake happens, and when the earthquake happens, it sort of breaks the jail, and all of a sudden, all these prisoners are loose, and they're able to get free. And Paul knew something, and all the prisoners knew something as well, is that if any one of them escaped with their life, it would come at the cost of that jailer's life. Rome has high expectations of the guard. If you let one person go, you lose your life. No excuses. And so when the earthquake happens, somehow Paul and Silas have enough influence in that jail to tell everybody, hey, let's just stay right here. Because they all knew that if they got away with their life, it would be at the cost of the jailers. And sure enough, all the prisoners stay right there. Jailer didn't know that. Remember, it's really, really dark. And so he's screaming out, he's crying out. He's about ready to fall on a sword because he knew that was going to be better than whatever he got from Rome. And Paul says, stop, don't do it. We're still here. And that act of kindness was absolutely stunning to the jailer. He'd never seen anything like that. He assumed his life was over and his life was saved by an act of kindness. Lydia needed a rational explanation of the gospel. The slave girl needed spiritual and social power. This hard-hearted civil servant was transformed by simple acts of kindness and character. And look what happens. Lydia is activated as a business person. She gets Paul an entire setup, a whole headquarters where he can build his ministry. Lydia, in her declaration of who Paul and Silas were, and in her deliverance, gave Paul and Silas legitimacy in the community. Yes, they were afraid of them, but everyone knew that they were speaking something that was powerful. And this jailer, you know what he does? He tends to the wounds of Paul and Silas. He cares for them. In response to his changed life, demonstrated by their kindness, he returns in kindness. Each one of them were reached in a unique way, and each of them are activated in a unique way to enable this church to come together. You would never expect to build a church this way. A Gentile single woman, a hard-hearted jerk of a jailer, the freak show of the town. And yet, each one of them heard the gospel in a way they needed to hear it, and it's activated. And this church emerges in this Roman colony where there was nothing before. There's one last group of people that you need to know about. The children. One of the reasons we know Lydia is either single or has a very detached husband is that she made the decision that her household be baptized. Household represented the children, the young people in the home, and the servants that worked in the home. And the jailer, when he was baptized, his whole family was baptized as well. You might think, well, that's not very... Don't they get to make a decision? Back in those days, people thought of things differently. They found their protection in the household. They found their protection from their community, and they trusted the leader of that household to make those decisions. Well, sure enough, those children grow up, and several years later, Paul and his ministry has gone to multiple other cities, but he finds out that Jerusalem has hit a famine, and there's a famine throughout all of Israel, and the church is suffering there, and he realizes that there's an opportunity to help the place from where he first heard the gospel. And so he rallies this big giving thing for the people, for the different churches. And I want you to hear the way Paul described. I want you to hear the way Paul described this little Philippian church and their response. He's writing to another church in Corinth, and he wanted to just talk about this church in Philippi. He says this, "And now, brothers and sisters, we want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches. In the midst of a very severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. For I testify that they gave as much as they were able, and even beyond their ability, entirely on their own. They urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the Lord's people. And they exceeded our expectations. They gave themselves first of all to the Lord, and then by the will of God also to us." There was a need, and they showed up. They knew what it meant to hear the gospel. They knew what it meant to have their lives activated for God and to serve the people of God. I say all this because it's towards the end of the year, and each year we do an end-of-the-year campaign. And I just want to explain our logic around our end-of-the-year campaign. A few weeks back, I told us, hey, look, we need to grow our monthly giving budget and get to a certain place of where we need to be. And we're about 70% there in regular recurring giving to our church. And we still need to get to a place to make sure we're ready to hit 2024 and to fulfill all of our objectives. But we want to do two things with our end-of-the-year budget. We want to go wide and invite everyone who calls 938 Church home to to commit to a recurring gift. Some of you give, and you have a plan, you do it each month. Others of us, like me, it just comes out through recurring gifts. But we want to invite everyone to make a recurring gift. That's going to widen our base of operations, give us confidence that we can, meet our obligations and grow past them to have an impact on our community. So we want to go wide, but we also want to go forward. And so some people like to give a one-time gift at the end of the year. We want to make sure any one-time gifts go specifically to our outreach. Let people know about our church, help people see, through postcards, Google ad campaigns, banners over the streets of Westchester. We're going to put all those one-time gifts into our outreach plans for next year. We want to grow wide, we want to go forward. Mass times velocity equals momentum, right? We want to, in many ways, just think like a running rhinoceros. We want to be able to have a lot of mass and go in the specific direction to have a connection to our community. Yes, that's Ronnie, our running rhino. We want to go wide and we want to go forward. Because we believe in churches and we believe in community. The truth of the gospel goes against cancel culture that says, I can only build community with the people who agree with me on everything. It goes against consumer culture that the church is for certain kinds of people and the rest of us are just spectators. Oh man, this is all of us. And we get to be all of this in together to be a blessing to our community. That's what we saw change the world the first time in the book of Acts. And that's what we believe can have incremental and significant impacts in our community every single day that we name Jesus as our Lord. We're going to go forward and worship. Why don't you stand together with us? And let me say a brief prayer as we go into this worship.